Welcome to the We Do Marketing Hour podcast. I'm your host, Alex Valencia, and our goal is to help you grow your business, your firm, or your life in the next 60 to 120 minutes. In each episode, we bring on experts in their respective fields and have in-depth life discussions that offer you the tools you need to create cutting-edge strategies for your business, for your life, for your family, spirituality, fitness, anything you can do now that you can start implementing for a better you. Today, we have the opportunity to sit down with someone super special, someone who's out of the scope of a lot of guests that we've had on our channel before. This person is not only a friend, a family friend, someone I highly respect and we spend a lot of time with. Her name is Sika. And today, Sika is going to be talking to us about mixed race identity in today's culture and how it can impact those in the industry. She's not only an author and editor, but a professor here in South Florida. We're super stoked to have her on the show. We always have a good time. So I'm excited for you guys to join us, learn more about her recent editorial and some of her past books. This is going to be an interesting, real life conversation with my friend Sika. Make sure you join us. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the We Do Marketing Hour. I'm your host, Alex Valencia, and I'm super stoked for today's guest. This is a different marketing hour than usual because we are not interviewing a lawyer, a law firm, or any colleagues within our marketing. With the growth of our podcast, we've expanded and want to interview just people out there, people that are doing something different, that are making a change. And I'm so fortunate and blessed to have this person in my life. This is my motherfucking friend, Sika Dagbovie-Mullins. She is my friend. We have amazing conversations. She is a scholar. We have fun together. Our families have kind of grown together. Her husband's a great friend of mine. So I'm super stoked to have you here, Sika. I'm going to dive into your amazing and super impressive bio, and then you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll talk about these amazing books that we're going to talk about today and what led you to write them. So Sika, Dr. Sika, look at that. Wow, she is fancy. Dr. Sika Dagbovie-Mullins is an associate professor and director of graduate studies in the Department of English at Florida Atlantic University here in South Florida, where she specializes in contemporary African literature. She is the author of Crossing Black, A Mixed Race Identity in Modern American Fiction and Culture, which was published. I didn't have a podcast, or we would have had her on back then, which examines assertions of a Black-centered mixed race identity where Black is not subject to erasure, but instead grounds a more expansive identity politics. She's also, and super stoked to talk about this one, she's also co-editor of Mixed Race Superheroes, which published this year in 2021, which is the reason for this webinar, which examines representations of racial mixedness and the idea of the superhero. Her articles have appeared in academic journals such as African American Review, the Journal of Popular Culture, and the Palimpsest, a journal on women, gender, and the Black International. Hope I nailed that. Wow, that is impressive, Dr. Sika. I'm going to start calling you that, Dr. Sika. Can I call you when I got a cold, Dr. Sika? What's your doctorate in?
Doctor.
What's the doctorate in?
So I have a PhD in English literature. I have a
wow.
Yeah, I went English all the way. I have a BA, MA, and PhD in literature, kind of following after my mother, who was an English high school teacher. So
wow. And it's true what they say about high school teachers and kids. They raise the smartest kids on the planet. Everyone I know whose mom or dad was a teacher has smart kids. And it's proof not only in you, but in my self-proclaimed goddaughter, Asila, who's absolutely brilliant for her age and gorgeous and one of the smartest little girls that I know. So tell us a little bit about you. What brought you here? We only have an hour, but there's such an amazing history that I personally know about you that brought you here. but also your mom, your dad. Tell me a little bit about your background, where Pop is from, where your mom's from, how they got together, and then we'll dive in a little deeper.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first, I didn't say thanks for having me. So, Alex, a good friend, love you, love your wife, love your family. Thanks so much for having me on. So yeah, so I think one of the things that got to me to where I am, and is why I'm studying what I'm studying, is because I kind of grew up not quite feeling like I ever quite fit in anywhere. So I have um, a mother who's first generation American and a father who's an immigrant, and then I have a mother who's white and a father who is black, West African. So my dad's from Togo, which is like a small country next to Ghana in West Africa. That's francophone, so it's French speaking. And my mom's parents came over, like Ellis Island came over. Like we found their names like on a boat coming over from Europe. And so she's Maltese and Finnish. And so they're like an interracial love story. They met in the Peace Corps and had my brother and I. And I think I definitely don't look like I'm like my mother's child. I mean, maybe someone who knows me might say something to make me feel good, but I don't. And much lighter than my dad. And so I think I was just always, and we got looks too. I mean, I think it's different, maybe a kid growing up now in like an interracial family, but certainly certain places we would go, we would get looks. I mean, my dad is very dark skinned African dude. And my mom's quite light, white American. So I think I was always really fascinated in issues related to belonging. Where do you belong? When don't you belong? Issues related to identity. And when I was a really voracious reader, and then I wanted to read more and more about it, and that's kind of why I research what I research. It's obviously connected to my own kind of personal identity.
So I know you're a voracious reader. So going back, growing up with your parents, and first question is, at what point, what age were you like, okay, I want to learn more about this? And secondly, did your mom being so educated and your dad, being black from West Africa, did they encourage you? Did you read white authors, black authors, mixed authors? Like, what was the combination of content that you were taking in to open this up for you?
Yeah. Well, I should also say my dad's a teacher too. So my dad was a French teacher, and my mom was a English teacher in the same high school that I and my brother went to. So they were both, kind of pushing the academics. But let's see here. I think that, so I'm going to tell, this is going to reveal my age, which I try to hide. But when I was growing up, it was when I was in high school, we were listening to hip hop. We were listening to KRS-One and Brand Nubian and the Jungle Brothers and De La Soul,
Yeah.
Tribe Quest. And it was a time period in which, I guess you'd call it, Afrocentrism was kind of in vogue, right, in terms of hip hop culture. And so me and my best friend, who also happens to be mixed race, black and white, really kind of gravitated to that music. And so we were wearing our cross colors and our, our medallions. And so I probably, for that reason, like, we were really invested in reading. I was reading a lot of African-American authored texts. So my favorite author to this day is Toni Morrison, who just passed away in 2019. And I remember taking a course. I went to a private school that I would not have attended had my parents not taught there. A very expensive, wealthy private school. And in that, I had a high school class with Dr. Antonio, I'll never forget her, who was South Asian and taught a Black literature class. And so I think that really sparked it. But probably previous to that, I think back about my parents' own conversation with me about race. I don't really remember any conversations. I think that I had a larger African family. My mom's family was not that big, and there were folks she weren't in touch with. And my grandparents died when I was kind of young on my mom's side. So she never like told me anything, but I also phenotypically look Black. So it's not like she had to, it's not like there was any kind of confusion there. It was just kind of like I was Black with a white mother and mixed race. And like we just moved, kept it moving. And my mom was in the Peace Corps in Togo in West Africa and is a like, cool ass white woman who is invested, whoever's the underdog, she is applauding and trying to kind of bring up and, protesting for. And so I don't guess it was never at odds. I mean, she was, she speaks the indigenous language that I don't speak. My dad, because she was there in the Peace Corps. So she's like, she was wearing African print cloth because she was there. So, I don't say she pushed me one way or the other. She just kind of let us be. And, I think that we both, like all kids, I think we're no different. I'm talking about my brother and I, like used college to try to kind of find ourselves. And, college helped us think about our identities and where we fit in or didn't fit in. And I think today, I don't know if you would have asked me in like high school, where I was much more insecure and kind of naive about things. But now, I see myself as both mixed race and Black, and I don't see those things as opposed. I see them, some people read those as like separate. I read those as kind of, complementary of each other, and I think that's it's a more nuanced and more accurate way of thinking about our identities, which in this country and other countries are just these like, little boxes. You have to be just this, this, and this, right? When in fact, many of us are not just one thing or a bunch of things, and our identities are really kind of complex. Our cultural identities, right? You were listening to some of that music too, right? Were you not? Our cultural identities are mixed up, our ancestries, right? It's really kind of complicated and deserves a more kind of nuanced examination than I think most people, offer it. So I'm babbling, but basically that's a way to connect kind of my background with the kind of work that
Do you think you identifying now and accepting it, right, is a maturity thing? Like, all right, I've accepted, right? I'm not nor this box, nor this box. I'm this, and I'm happy with it, and I accept it, and, I take it in, and this is what I'm teaching my daughter, right? It's not like, and I love that you said that, your parents didn't have the conversation. Like, was there really a conversation to have? Or am I really opening the door to insecurities and thoughts of like, hey, you're different and you got to figure out you're different. And, I'm sorry you're different. And then you just start putting thoughts in people's minds, right? That start, the mind's so powerful that you eventually start manifesting that feeling. And it's so great that, you were aware, they were aware, but it wasn't like, oh shit, here comes my half mixed kid coming home. I got to have a conversation or someone about it, right? Just because of what was going on in society. And maybe there was when things happened, but it wasn't like an everyday thing. And, for us that are on the other side of it, don't really understand what happens within that culture. And I kind of, because it's new in my head, I've been watching this guilty pleasure, and it's actually done. It was a TV show on Netflix called Georgia and Jenny. Have you seen it? Or
2 episodes.
I feel I can't watch it yet, but I started watching it. I mean, they fit in a lot of information into each episode, into one series of, just making every aspect of whatever's going on in pop culture in the world and culture and sexuality all into the episode. But it's good to watch and educate. But she was mixed, and there were several scenes. I wish we could actually show the show, because I would love to get your thought process on what happens with her and her boyfriend when they have an argument over identity. And one was a mixed race. She was half Black, half white, and the boy was Asian and white. And they both had really good arguments of what. And one of them was more, hey, I just put my head down and do what I'm supposed to do. And the other one's like, well, I stand up and I think it's wrong, and I just haven't found my identity yet. So it was so beautiful when you said, I found that identity. And now that I babbled, you can answer the question while I find my electrical cord real quick. Hold on one second. We can pause.
I'll answer that question about my parents and having a conversation. And you asked, like, do you think it's maturity? And I think that that's an excellent point about maturity. I think when you're a kid, you just want to fit in. You just don't want to be different, regardless of what that is, right? Sexual orientation, religion, race, ethnicity. You just want to be like everybody else. And I lived in a predominantly white suburb, went to a predominantly white school. I remember, being accused. First of all, I was like totally a suburban girl. So some of the students who went to my school were from the city, right? And so there's this way in which sometimes city versus suburb gets racialized, right? Oh, like you're not really,
you're not Black enough, you're not hip hop enough, you're not right. Yeah, exactly.
So I'm raised by a white mother. I'm from the suburbs, and I speak in a way that is not coded racially, or as like I was growing up, oh girl, you talk like you're white, right? And so I was hyper self-conscious about that. I mean, I remember even it's so embarrassing to think back now, but I remember my friend and I went to like a summer program that was for people of color. It was like Latino, African American, Asians. We had to go, I was at the University of Michigan, we had to go around the room and say where we're from, and like did not want to say, where I was from. First of all, the suburb where I'm from, we never could have afforded had we not, we lived on campus of the school. So it's a very posh area, right? It's like saying you're from Bell Harbor or something. I don't know if that's a good equivalent, but anyway, I would say like right outside Detroit. Like I wanted to kind of claim, and I think you get to a point, I don't know, it's different for everybody. For me, it was probably at the end of undergrad, where you just don't give an F anymore, where you come into your own, where peer pressure is not as strong, where sometimes when you get into your like young adulthood, actually you seek being different rather than being like everybody else. So I think it was just kind of everybody is going to have their thing, and mine happened to be that. And I think I just got to the point where I didn't care. Like, you think that I speak a different way? I don't, like I keep it moving, and you find your tribe, right? Like Chris and I found you all, and you find your tribe, and often you're like-minded, or you have things in common, and you move away from there. So yeah. And thinking back to my parents and then never kind of talking to me, I think because I studied this stuff, I kind of wish there had been a few conversations. It's nothing that I like blame or like I have some angst about, but that's something I struggle with today. You mentioned my daughter who's 8, living in the world we're living in, of social media and the news, and we can't turn on the news without seeing, I struggle with how much to tell her, how much not to say, how does one talk about race with kids? It's like really complicated. So I think I shared with you, like she was really little, she's a Barbie girl. She still loves Barbie. Right. She'd always want the white blonde hair, blue-eyed Barbies, which is nothing wrong. I mean, you can have all Barbies, but she would only want that one. And I remember I told her, as a prize for like pooping on the potty, she could go get a Barbie. And we went to the Target, and she picks this white Barbie. And if you know anything about Barbies, they're really diverse, but certain ones, they'll make the exact same one, but black, right? So like one's holding a dog and has a whatever, and they'll have the exact same one. So she picks that one. And I'm like, inside my head, I've got all this shit swirling, my own things that being.
It's her own things. Yep.
Yeah. Me wanting straight hair. And I was like, no, this can't happen. I'm like, well, what about this one? I pull out the exact same one, but black. She's like, no. I'm like, okay, let's keep looking. She pulls another one. We do this for like 5 minutes. And then finally I was like, said to myself, Sika, stop projecting your own. And I just let her pick that one. But it's still really important. After that, she knows there's no more white blonde Barbies allowed in the house. We've got enough, and I'm supplementing it. And now she's got more, she's fine with it. But I don't want her to think, because there's so many ways in which this culture and society tells us that Blackness is not beautiful, that it's not smart or intelligent, right? That it's ignorant, that it's, it's so important for me in these really indirect ways to let her know that her hair is beautiful just the way it is, that her skin is, whatever is beautiful. That like, and because I study it, I'm always hyper conscious. So like all the time, I'm like, I'm like, no, let's get this one, and I'm praising, her beautiful, gorgeous hair and her, in its natural state. And I just think that all of us, I mean, whether we are whatever ethnicity we don't have to be people of color, should be talking to our kids about race, because the reality is, there there is a lot of tension, and it's better to kind of be informed and comfortable about talking about it than uncomfortable and pretending that, oh, we're all fine, everyone gets along, which our recent reality tells us is a myth.
Right. Great subject. And it made me think about when you said the depiction of Black, not being, and it ties into something that was said in one of your books, but it's, the perception and the ideal that we were taught, or we weren't, maybe earlier on, like, obviously I wasn't, but before that, time after time in this country or another, that you were thought of as a different, like less than, not as intelligent. That's a lot to try to absorb. And, since I don't have to live the life that you guys have lived, for me, it's like, man, why are we, bringing that back up? Because I don't think about it, right? I don't feel that way. But going back to the 90s and having the music, right? Because music's huge right now. And I'm that old person again, where it's like, man, I can't stand today's music because I don't believe what they're saying. But if we go back to De La Soul, KRS-One, Big Daddy Kane, like Tupac, even guys that, and even Tupac went a little too far, but the guy was so intelligent and was actually had a true message and was his own revolutionary for his time. But let the system beat him. And I just think you get caught up in all that. But when you heard that music, or we heard that music, and, even the rap before that was a little simple, right? There was only so much to say. It was about party and everything. But then you had that educational side of loving who you were, or talking about the neighborhoods that you lived in. And that brought awareness, not only nationally, but globally. So I think that's something to admire for sure. And, having those pioneers that educated on it and created a culture that we all want to be part of, right? Like, there's a whole Black culture that we all like to imitate. And we've had this conversation personally in the car, maybe after a few drinks, that, using the N-word and, being educated on using the N-word. And, for me growing up, it was a way how you spoke to all your friends from football, just in school. And then, you start realizing now why it's used and why it was taking over as the power word within the Black community. This is our word to use. We can use it however we want, right? We're taking it from how you used it against us for us to use it within ourselves and take over that word and taking over that power. So, I mean, super interesting. I mean, I love it. I love having these conversations. I love being educated. I love hearing you speak and just dive into it, because we don't see what we see. Again, this could keep going on. And before we jump on the books, like, because pop culture too, and I think we're seeing so many things, and you haven't watched any of these shows or movies because you hate horror, but there have been some amazing new shows on television, some African-American storytellers partnering up with other people that are telling some really awesome, very descriptive, very satire-esque, if that's even a word, storytelling of their experience or how they feel, or even if they went back and did something, and it's impressive. I think if you're intelligent enough to capture the message, you're really entertained. And if you're not intelligent enough to capture it, or just watching it for entertainment, I think it will eventually sink in. But there's such an amazing message behind it, and they're doing such an amazing job, and it's so impressive that I'll call Chris up. I'm like, dude, did you watch this show? If you haven't watched this show, nobody's done anything like this yet. Them just did it. Yvette just made me watch them. We just finished watching that. Too Horror for You. There was the other show on HBO what was it? Where it has a closeness to your book.
As the yeah. Is that the one that you and Chris were watching?
Yeah.
With Regina King as the. Is that the one?
No, it wasn't with Regina King, but it had the superhero book in it.
Oh, yes. I can't remember the name of it either.
I can't think of it either, so I could give it props.
But I think that much of this began with like Get Out, right? I think that
right. Get Out started it for sure.
Yeah. One of the, right, at least within the last whatever.
Yeah.
Like contemporary, either film or television show that had mass appeal, that made a lot of money, that people were interested in, you know, regardless of their race or ethnicity, but was also, sophisticated in its examination, right, of race relations, right, all the while being kind of funny, satirical, right, suspense. And, you know, there've been a number of like HBO shows and other things that kind of followed along in that, right, vein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we only know about Get Out is because, you know, they've allowed it out. Like, who knows how many other artists are out there that have been speaking or telling their stories that, you know, just haven't made it out or been published because, you know, it wasn't good enough, or it wasn't white enough, or it was too in depth. He was saying too much. Who knows? But I mean, they're definitely pushing the envelope.
Lovecraft Country.
Lovecraft Country. Yes. Oh my gosh. So good.
About was Watchmen. That one has Regina King that I started.
Yeah, Watchmen's with Regina King. But Lovecraft Country, oh my gosh, that show, it had absolutely everything in it. And I loved it. I loved the message. I love the depiction of the characters that they were trying to depict and the reasoning for it. And this is all storytelling, right? Like, it has some history involved in it, and, you know, but it also is, as the writer, the person that she wrote, this was how she felt, right? You know, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true for everyone, but it might have been true for that group and true for her and what she felt and what she depicted. And that's why I love film so much, man. I'm not a huge reader, but I'm a watcher. Everybody consumes content differently, and for me, it's a well done movie or series, and those. So that let's unless you had something to say, go ahead.
I want to say one quick thing, because earlier you had said something about how, you know, how Blackness, making a huge, I was saying, you know, huge generalization is thought of as like less intelligent, ignorant, less beautiful, less with all these things. And I think you said something about like, you know, historically, and I just say, make it really clear, it's now too, but it's really indirectly and in subtle ways, right? So I'm not saying it's like necessarily some, you know, book everyone's given when they're 5 that tells you that, but rather in who we praise and who gets modeling jobs and what cartoons feature, non-white kid, all these subtle little things via the media tell us that, right? So it was not a surprise to me that my daughter was picking the blonde-haired whatever, because that is always the pretty girl in every cartoon, in every show, every Disney thing. So that's kind of what I mean. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
It's subtle ways that let you think. It's like the subtle ways that women are told that we're always like need to lose weight. You know, it's not like we get some manual.
Is it really subtle?
Right.
I don't know. I think it's very apparent. Like, even for me as a guy, right? Like, you know, they don't put dad bods on magazines. The famous actresses and stuff, you know, I'm fortunate to have a gorgeous wife, but, you know, they're not putting, you know, side by side, right? My kids have done acting, right? We've gone on family castings. They'll usually cast a better looking dad to go with my family. Sorry, sir, you didn't meet the cut. Your wife and kids, well, they can go. We're gonna get this really good looking, taller, ripped guy into the picture. Like, hey, what? So it's not just you and I think eventually, I mean, there was a time where it was subtle, right? But I think now everything's being pushed down, right? It doesn't matter whether it's you being black or white or weight gain or losing weight. I mean, we're being pushed down our throat. I think social media, man, we can really go dive into this. What a woman should look like, right? Like, apparently the Kardashians have created what a woman should look like, where now there's surgery because of it. So, props to them for creating what the woman should look like these days. But, you should be happy with everything. And I'm learning that about myself through, meditating and learning and, just affirmations and be like, man, you're happy, right? Like for me, working out's a huge thing. But the words that you say to yourself every single day, right? I can work out for an hour, but if I tell myself that I'm overweight or I had a shitty workout that day, well, those are negative affirmation or non-affirmation. So I got to tell myself, I love myself no matter what, right? And it's this whole thing where you're learning because society, television, all these other non-subtle ways are telling us that what we believe in is wrong. And that goes for everything. I think everything we're being told, what you believe in is wrong, whether, they're fitting it in. Everybody's getting a piece of it these days. And I don't think it's that subtle.
Mm-hmm. No.
So so I want to talk about your first book real quick. And that was Crossing Black Mixed Race. And what got me here, and this is this was a quote from one of the reviews, and let me start it here. So Dagbovie-Mullins attends to the ways the personal past combines with public memory to produce felt connections to Blackness. Their ongoing grappling with private selfhood in the context of public perceptions makes plain how characters can be both Black and mixed race. They exhibit a desire to be free of race rules, but can nevertheless do while so remaining tied to Black consciousness.
Yeah.
So many things in that short sentence, right? Grappling with private selfhood. And we kind of talked about this on how you got there. The context of public perceptions, right? Like when you're an amazing writer, you can fit so many amazing, valuable words in just a couple sentences. Both Black and mixed race, accepting it, the race rules, what those are. And then even Black consciousness, like quote that's cool. Like Black consciousness, like what's that mean? Like, that's, what are you conscious of? Like, I'm conscious of who I am. Tell me more about that in that review.
Yeah, sure. And maybe I'll give an example. Like, not everyone, like you said, you're not necessarily a reader, but you enjoy film and cinema and such, or pop culture. So like, one chapter in that book. So I demonstrate how kind of what you've just read plays out in various novels and memoirs. And then at the end, I talk about two pop culture figures, which I could just use an example right now, which is Mariah Carey and Halle Berry, right? So both Mariah Carey and Halle Berry have a white mother and a Black father. Both grew up with a Black, absent kind of Black father and grew up raised by their white mothers. And both, I think, don't shy away from, are very clear that they are kind of mixed. They don't hide it. They don't, right? But also acknowledge and put at the forefront their Blackness, right? Like, so like when Halle Berry won the Oscar, I can't remember how many years it's been now, but she said, I think she said something about, being the second Black woman to win that, right? And Mariah Carey has also acknowledged that she's like a Black woman, right? And so those are two examples to me that suggest that that kind of a mix, that kind of challenging society's definitions of being just one thing. You can both challenge like race rules in America while still kind of claiming a Black consciousness, and those two things need not be at odds. So let's kind of connect your question, like, what do you mean by Black consciousness, right? I think it's hard to give like a very succinct definition, and it probably means different things for different people, right? But I would argue that it's connected to certainly cultural memory, right? It's connected to, it's experiential, right? So that, for example, it doesn't matter where you're from, and it kind of doesn't matter where you go. You could go to London, you could go to Germany, you could go to, Japan, you could go, like globally, the experience of Black people is different. I don't want to suggest it's a monolithic experience, But globally, Black people are seen as the bottom rung of the ladder, even where Black people don't exist, right? So like darkness is seen as not as, right? Whether you go to Brazil, somewhere in South America, or you go to Asia, where kind of porcelain skin, right? And people are putting on, Lightener cream, right? Sammy Sosa is a good example of
right.
that Blackness is seen as something that needs to be avoided, seeing something as bad. And thus that creates a kind of global experience, right? That suggests that I have a connection, or I feel like I have a connection. Now, not every Black person obviously feels like this, but the consciousness, right, that connects me to other people who are also kind of, and there's also kind of cultural memory that goes along with that, right? Going back to, it's similar, when I'm teaching my students, I say, well, think about like the Holocaust, right? And, Jews often repeat the important phrase of never forget, right? And the idea is that, if you are, a 13-year-old Jewish girl living today in the US, you need not have gone through, you wouldn't have gone through, right? You weren't alive in the 1940s. You wouldn't have gone through the concentration camps and the Holocaust. But there's this idea that you have is a cultural memory, right? That continues generation with generation, right? And the same thing is, and there's scholars who study this, right? Cultural memory, it's a real thing. It's not personal memory, cultural memory. And the same thing can be said for Black folk, right? So my definition of consciousness is all of these things. It's kind of experience, it's memory, right? It's also connected to certainly, struggles, right? Racial struggles, and kind of being in that, within the U.S. or outside the U.S., being in that position of continually to fight for civil rights. Not in the when we say civil rights, we go right back to like 1950s, right? I'm talking about, right, Black people still fighting against institutional racism and such. So I think consciousness, and conscious, if you just think of the word, what does it mean to be conscious? I mean, there's like a baseline definition of like, oh, I'm awake, right? You can start with that definition. Like, are you conscious? Like, Alex, are you conscious? Not like, are you just awake, but are you aware of your surroundings? Are you, are you like intellectually, right, and otherwise, thinking through and, kind of making moves, right, as it's dictated by your surroundings and life and life events and world events. That's kind of a consciousness, right? It suggests a kind of active, not passiveness. And so when we were talking about music earlier and how there was a lot of conscious hip hop, back when we were kind of coming up. Well, what does that mean to say conscious hip hop? Well, what we meant when we said that term, right, was it was rap that was, kind of heavily invested in, resistance, right, and fighting for, the basic humanity of peoples, right? It would call out things that it saw was wrong, right? That's what we meant by conscious, right? That it's like, oh yeah, I'm aware of what's going on, and I'm going to voice my opinion, or I'm going to voice my resistance or my protest to that, right? And so I think, if you think about conscious, just the definition of like, oh, does it mean, like a patient, is that patient conscience or not? And you go from there, it kind of helps you understand what one means when one says consciousness, you're right, aside from like the body, when you're talking about the mind, doesn't mean right. The mind to be conscious. Yeah.
Awesome. So the book is called Crossing Black Mixed Race Identity in Modern Literature and Culture, published in 2013. Quick book description. And so since 2008, the election of Barack Obama to the presidency, debates over whether America has entered a post-racial phase have set the media abuzz. In this penetrating and provocative study, Dr. Sika Dagbovie-Mullins adds a new dimension to this dialogue as she investigates the ways in which various mixed race writers and public figures have redefined both Blackness and whiteness by invoking multiple racial identities. So the book discusses 3 novels and 3 memoirs. You touched on this, mixed race celebrities like Mariah Carey and Halle Berry. In the book, she challenges conventional claims about biracial identification with a concept she calls Black sentient mixed race identity. Black sentient consciousness stresses a perception rooted in Blackness that does not over-determine, but still plays a large role in one's racial identification. Wow, that's just a powerful statement. Black sentient mixed race identity.
Took me a while to come up with that one. Yeah.
Wow. That's a whole sabbatical.
Wish. So, this book was my PhD dissertation that I revised and turned.
Right.
And I'll just
Is this required reading for your students or no?
No.
Do you recommend it?
Yeah, maybe recommend it, but that's icky to kind of like.
Yeah. Is it mixed race, your class?
So I do teach, I've taught a graduate class to like graduate students called the tragic mulatto. And I've taught critical mixed race studies pretty much to graduate students. My undergrads, I teach like Afro-American literature, they're not so specialized.
But is it a diversified classroom?
Yeah. I teach at FAU, which touts itself as the most diverse Florida state school.
Really?
I think our numbers show that. Yeah, in terms of our student population.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not from Florida, and so when I moved here, I mean, we know that Florida is diverse, but our student body, obviously there are, large number of students who are from the Caribbean, who are from South America, right? Some international students, right? African Americans, right? A huge, I think we've been designated, it's called Hispanic Serving Institution, which means so many, yeah. And so it is a real mix. And so in my classes, they're quite, you sign up for my classes, so you wouldn't sign up, likely, every once in a while I get someone who's not interested and they just need to fulfill a requirement. But usually you're not going to sign up for African American literature unless there's some kind of interest. So usually my classes are really diverse, which is great because when we are talking about, I let my students know right away, like we're going to be talking about race a lot. And for a lot of people, I would say especially white Americans, but probably for a lot of people, it's uncomfortable, right? Because we just are like, I think because there's not national dialogue about it in a way that is, productive, that when we get in these small spaces, we feel like, oh God, are we going to say something that's going to be racist or someone going to whatever? Or do you have beliefs that are, So I let students know this is like an open space, right? Not open like, say some stupid shit and get, I'll kick you out. But an open space in which we should be able to share what we think about the text and what we're doing and talk about race and talk about, that's how we get over things. We need to talk about things that are uncomfortable. I think the problem is, and has been our problem nationally, is that we don't talk about these things, or that when we do, we talk about them in really, if you get any person like anybody, especially a white person, and want to talk about race, they're immediately, usually, going to feel like, oh, I don't know what to say here. I don't, and I want students to feel like, no, this is the opportunity and space to do it, right? Because when you go out and you get your, when you get your BA and you're in the real, the real world, or you're working, you're never going to have a space like this where you can just kind of dialogue. It's hard to like spaces, right? That's what I loved about being a student. I'd love to be a student now. I'd love to just be a lifelong student because, and it's one reason why I love my job. I'm like, wow, I get paid to like think and write, which is just what I love to do. Right? Like, that's great. I'm just constantly thinking and examining and analyzing. Really for students, this is the time when else in your life are you just learning? And that's all you have to do is learn, right? You learn post this, right, in your jobs, but you're producing and doing all these other things. You don't really have time to spend. I've never been I've always been in academia, so I've never had a job outside of it, but I can imagine it's not the same. You don't have the time to like read novels and read history, anthropology, like all these wonderful things. So, I don't even remember what your question was, but basically, oh yeah, do I teach about this thing? Yeah, so I do. Yes, diversity. So we do have a diverse student body, which is really great. I think it would be much more difficult if I was teaching at the University of Iowa and had a different
Right.
student population. And right, I mean, my Latinx students and my Caribbean, they bring so much to this kind of conversation of this messiness called race, right?
And you just used the word Latinx, which is absolutely new to me. Yvette brought it to me recently. I don't know anyone really using it, but it's interesting how we move away from labels, but still give ourselves labels, right? What is it? I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
No, you're
Like
right.
the belief and non-belief, right? Like you actually, by not participating, you're participating. So it's just so funny. It's like this whole weird circle. Yeah, but we also talked on, and then we'll move on to your other book, which mixed race superheroes seems like it would be on, not as a deep dive into race or mixed race identity, but maybe a softer voice into it. But before we touch on that, you said it took you a long time to create this Black sentient mixed race identity. And I don't even know what the word sentient means. Like, so do tell.
Okay. So, I mean, part of that was when I was, let's see here, I was a graduate student, right? Writing and wanting what do you call that? Wanting what's the word for that? Like lots for words,
Let's use the word sentient since I don't know what it means.
Okay. So,
no, okay.
Well, sentience is just kind of the awareness, the capacity. It's like a sensory experience, right?
Right.
The capacity to feel feelings, to feel sensations, right? Yeah, and it's often kind of connected with like sentience, sensory, right? Feeling, right? And your capacity to do that. And so and so oftentimes, for example, maybe you'll hear that term used when philosophers or scholars think about animals, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you have pets, right? Do you think that your dogs are sentient? Meaning, do they think? Do they, right? I mean, there's a dialogue about that, of whether like animals like have feelings, or is it just, do we prioritize like human beings, right? I would imagine as a dog owner, you'd be like, hell yeah, right? Like I can tell that, right? So they're sentient beings, right? Is a plant sentient, right? Does a plant have, I mean, those things I think there's still so much we don't know about,
Right.
The universe, about various things, right? That I'll leave that for scientists and philosophers and such, right? So I kind of borrowed the term, right? Because I like this idea of what it evoked, sentience, of kind of an awareness, right? And an understanding and such. And that connected for me to what we've already discussed, which is like Black consciousness, which I also said was like awareness and whatever. And I was like, ooh, I wanted something catchy. That's the word I was looking for before. I'm like, oh, I need like a little thing.
Catch it. Yeah, phrase.
Yeah, like I came up with it, right? But I also wanted something that was like an easy, okay, when I say this is what I mean. So I don't have to keep on explaining it. I can just use this term. And I said it before, but basically, for me, what a Black sentient mixed race identity is a mixed race identity. I'm not saying this is something that somebody would say, like I'm Black sentient mixed race.
No, not yet. But when we hashtag it after the webinar, it's gonna be the thing.
No, not ever. I didn't see it as that's something with someone would claim. As a scholar, an examination of various texts, I saw this as emerging, right? Which was that these characters would be, all the characters that I looked at were Black and white, a Black parent and a white parent, let me put it that way. And they all challenged the idea of race in some way, right? Like, they either, some of them passed, for example, could pass as white. And so they would pass for white for some period of time. Or maybe they would resist somebody's, an outsider's definition of them, right? Like, you can't define me as Black, or you can't define me as whatever, right? which is kind of challenging like race rules. At the same time, they didn't do that in a way that elided Blackness, right? Or evaded Blackness, which tends to be, which I saw, particularly at the time I was writing, as a trend. And that's connected to what I said earlier about, like why, okay, I'm gonna go somewhere else just for a second, but like colloquially, right? When you talk to people, oftentimes people are like, oh, mixed race babies are so pretty, right? Or like, ooh, when you have a baby, oh, your babies are gonna be so cute, right? And don't think they're saying anything wrong. I think what people don't realize, and it's really complicated and deep, is that, and I'm not saying these people are thinking this, I'm just saying this is like,
the perception.
Yes. Or not this is perception. I think that this is like our history and other things tell us such, is that things that are Blackness that is diluted is seen as more attractive.
Wow.
I think what people don't realize, right, is that when they say that, so I have a friend, like, for example, who's dark skinned, married to an Irish guy, and she's got 6 kids who are all gorgeous because they're gorgeous, not because they're mixed, but they're gorgeous, right? And so she'll tell me that sometimes people will say to her, I mean, they really are a beautiful family. Oh, your daughter's so beautiful. She must look like her dad. So there are these like really, so is that racist? No, that's not racist. But the point is that like, we're so messed up in how we think about things, right? That I would argue that, and it's very clear to me in the media, that things that are less Black, but just a little bit Black, enough Black that like it's cool or it's like exotic or it's whatever, is what we want. Too much Black, and it's like, whoa. That's not what I asked for. But if it's a touch Black, we are enticed. We are fascinated, right? We find it, exotic and sexual and whatever, but not too Black, right? And I think that is connected to, a distancing from Blackness that I see as problematic, right? Because we don't want to feed into this kind of white supremacist notion that, which goes back to the Enlightenment period, which is that like Africans were ignorant and bad, right? And Europeans are intelligent and good. And that's still alive today, but in really kind of subtle ways. And that's a perfect example of like fetishizing like people who are actresses and whatever, who are like ambiguous or look in between. So it's not wrong to say they're beautiful, but I would, what I would say is question someone, okay, that's beautiful. Is that more beautiful than this thing? And why is that thing more beautiful? Everything is, our conceptions of beauty and aesthetics and such is shaped by the culture in which we live in, right? So I would say that, a really broad nose and dark skin and hair that is excessively curly is not beautiful to us. I mean, it's beautiful in my father's country, but it's not beautiful to us as Americans, because I would argue we've been taught that that's not beautiful. And if we think that our own views on beauty is like, well, that's just how I think, I would say that's bullshit. I would say that that's a really uninformed, naive idea of how, it's like my own, like, why do I want to lose 5 pounds? Do I think I really need to lose 5? No, I have been, right, in all these ways, like you were talking about your dad bod. No, it's because it's hard to block out kind of society. I mean, we'd have to live on an island with no social media and no TV, and we probably wouldn't have a problem with ourselves, right? But once we're in this, So anyway, I don't remember what your.
I think you nailed it. I think we got on it. I think we went further in it, but it's still interesting. I mean, it's great. But then I think, right, like, well, I think, that was a sentient or awakening moment for me, for like, thinking, hearing your thought process on what's been proven and what's been said on, when someone says that, or, when, well, if you put a little white into it, it's going to make it better looking, right? Like, I like my black. I automatically thought black coffee, right? Once you put creamer in it, it starts lightening it up. And I just started thinking that view from somebody else doing that, like a evil mind in a lab, like, oh, if we take all these black people and put a little half and half, they're all going to be better looking. We're going to create this gorgeous new race, right? But then I also think from my own naive and loving the world and loving my friends idea, like, well, I think when we all start commingling and being with each other, and it doesn't matter what color or race or anything you are, I think you just start creating not only visually beautiful people, but beautiful because they're putting out a different acceptance energy out now. Right. And not just saying, hey, everyone should stay with their kind, like people have thought before. But in my idea, I just think, when we're all just in this little world, this little bubble in my own head, right, where, we're thinking, I think mixed race people are beautiful. You mix a white dude and a Spanish lady, a beautiful kid comes out, right? Same thing with black and white or black and Asian, right? There's even a hashtag Black Asian, right? There's there's this whole thing and a whole depiction. And now people want to be that, right? Like there's probably people trying to go and breed that, just like there is people breeding different types of good looking dogs and stuff. And not to compare that, but it's like this whole thing, animals and just breeding what the thought process of beauty is. And, to be lame and just say, I think it comes from within is naive to say, but I love your idea on it. Like just giving me that thought process of, damn, hearing that lady say that, I'm like, damn, she just said that. Like that's crazy, right? Because they're probably not thinking that, but deep down inside, you're right. We have been made to think that with those subtle ideas of what's beautiful and what's not.
All of us, by the way.
All of us, yeah, black, white, any color. I think we all have, right? Even within yourselves, and it goes beyond color.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Great conversation. I love this. All right. So next book released 2021, Mixed Race Superheroes, co-edited anthology of essays. The book description: Mixed Race Superheroes examines representations of racial mixedness, literal, metaphorical, or symbolic, that take on, challenge, or complicate the stereotypes and romanticization of mixed race identities and the idea of the superhero primarily in comics, film, and television. First of all, I love the word romanticization. Mixed race superheroes addresses issues such as hybridity, belonging, non-belonging, racial authenticity, and purity. Dual identities, passing, and post-racialism in diverse collection of superhero texts. The book has 12 chapters, and the introduction written by Sika and Eric Berlatsky. The first chapter by Sika examines a very well-known film and one of mine and my kids and wife's favorites, the 2017 film Spider-Man Homecoming, featuring Zendaya, who is mixed race, Tom Holland, Michael Keaton, and the 1984 issue of Amazing Spider-Man, also entitled Homecoming. Sika examines the representations of blackness, race passing, and race mixing in both, noting how the film both recycles and goes beyond stereotypes of racial mixedness. So let's talk about mixed race superheroes.
Hey, yes. So my co-editor, Eric, he's a professor at FAU. He's actually the chair of the English department, and he is a self-described comics nerd. Like he read comics his whole life as a boy, like still reads them, has a whole collection, totally into them. And he asked me to help him out with some things that he was writing about comics and race. And then we were like, why don't we, wait a minute, there's like something here. Why don't we like do a book about it, like an anthology about it? Because there's so much, I mean, if you would think, I'm gonna just give you some very obvious examples, right? Of like the prototype for the superhero, like Superman, right? Or the costuming, right? This idea of most superheroes have dual identities, right? Like Spider-Man is Peter Parker and Spider-Man.
Ego,
right?
super ego, yeah.
Yeah, Clark Kent turns into Superman, right? And there's that, that moment where they are their, like human or whatever selves, right, as Peter Parker or whatever, and then they become this like special thing. And that idea of like a dualness or duality is like so fitting when you think about, racially mixed people who often feel like they have a dual identity. I'm both Black and I'm white. I'm this and I'm that. So there's so many, and then, for some mixed race people who look a certain way who can pass, right? Like, I remember for a long time, people didn't know that Derek Jeter was Black or
what?
I think it's like in the early days, like when you,
right.
Or Mariah Carey, definitely when she first came on the scene.
Yeah, you had no idea.
No, people had no idea. They called her like a white Whitney Houston, and she was like, So anyway, for people who can pass, right, that idea of passing is like, Superman passes as Clark Kent, right? He's really this alien from Kryptonite, but he passes. So there were all these kind of connections that we wanted to look at. And let's see, what else would I say about it? I think the book's description says it a lot, but there's the chapters range from comics, right? So like my co-editor who I mentioned, Eric, he talks about The Flash, which was a television show, also a comic. Oh, I don't know if your listeners have seen Steven Universe, which is on.
Yeah, we've watched that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun, right? So there's a chapter on that. Let's see here. There's a chapter on Miles Morales, Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh, I love that one too. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, amazing. Right. And then, comics and some other things. Right. And so each of the contributors and, myself and Eric, and I kind of like, actually in a deep way, think about the ways in which either consciously or unconsciously, subtly or directly, literal mixed race characters, like Miles Morales has like a Puerto Rican mother and African American father. So that's an example of like literal mixedness. But there's also examples of metaphoric. So I'll give you an example. Let's see here. One of our contributors talks about the Hulk.
Yeah, the Hulk and Venom.
Right. So think about how the Hulk, right? The scientist, I forgot his name.
Bruce Banner.
Bruce Banner, thank you. I was going to say Benjamin. Bruce Banner is the scientist. So that contributor reads symbolically, right? Reads that move from the intellectual scientist into the huge, right, angry, rageful, and green, monstrous Hulk as symbolically a representation of mixedness in terms of how whiteness is defined, how Blackness is defined historically and in popular culture, right? So the angry, rageful, bulky man that we fear, right? The Hulk kind of replicates white society's fear of Black males, right? And how fitting that the scientist who's white is an intellect and calm and not rageful. And so my point is that the book looks at both literal representations, but then more metaphoric representations, like symbolic, which oftentimes I think for, like when I teach students who are not English majors and maybe they're engineering major and we're analyzing literature, they're like rolling their eyes, like, because I'm talking about symbolism, symbolic things like, they're like, bullshit. Why does that represent that? Why would you need the Hulk as a Black man, right? And without going into lengthy discussion, but I say that's how I do. That's what we do. And in English, that's what I'm trained to do, which is to think beyond the literal. I'm not making stuff up for the sake of it, like I'm just gonna make up some bullshit, but rather, right, when we take into account history and culture and all these other kind of elements at play, including literary devices and texts, we read things not like the author meant it to be that. We're not saying
right. That was my next question. They didn't mean it to be that, right?
Oh, right. So oftentimes, now I'm on a little aside, but like I've brought authors to my class before. Actually, in the fall, I had one person who wrote this short story collection come visit the class. We just read her short story collection. And what's so cool about that is sometimes my students will like raise their hand and say, oh, I remember this one author I brought, Rebecca Makkai, really big name, American author. We'd read this novel, a short story where food was constantly in it. She was making, there were references to food throughout the whole thing. And in my class, we analyzed it and we found food as like a metaphor for longing, because you think like hunger, craving, longing, and it fit in with like what the book was about, the story was about. So we brought her to class, and so my student was like, yeah, we read it as this, and she gave this whole thing, and the author started laughing, and she's like, I love that, and I'm going to use that from now on. She's like, but truth is, I was pregnant when I wrote this. I loved it, and I was like, yes, that's so important, because much of this is unconscious, right? But it's not, I think actually if it was forced, if an author was like, I'm going to make the apple be
exactly
whatever, would feel to
contrived. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you said, you enjoy film, right? I mean, oftentimes can't we see, let's go to superheroes, for example, right? The X-Men. I don't know if you're a fan of that kind of series. I love all those, right? It's so clear how you can read the X-Men. Who are they? They're mutants. They're mutants who are told to hide, who are told to assimilate. They're mutants who are told to hide whatever oddity they have and become a part of the fabric of the culture. They're folks who feel marginalized, who feel othered. Some of them develop a little faction, become evil because they have such resentment over that. I mean, it's a metaphor for any.
It is a metaphor for any. Yep.
Any group that feels right on the outside and the outskirts of society, right? You could read it racially. You could read it in terms of religion.
Yeah, whatever you're feeling, you can take the metaphor for sure. Exactly. I think that's the beauty of that type of literature is, the comic book can be taken on by so many different aspects of your consciousness, your ideas of how it's affecting you. And it could change every time you read it.
Oh, absolutely. And there are multiple interpretations, as for me as a teacher, I'm like, well, as long as it's substantiated by the evidence, which would be the text, any reading is possible as long as you have evidence that's from the text that helps you with your reading. And that's why I love what I do. And that's why I find, cinema, fiction, they're all text to read, even though you're not reading, it's a different way of reading, right?
Right.
You're reading a film. Like if you go to a movie and then you and your wife talk about it later, it's the same. It's similar to when you read a book and you analyze the book. It's like you're taking symbolism, you're taking dialogue, right? Imagery, and you're coming up with something to say about it that goes beyond just the, it's not just for the aesthetic pleasure of watching the movie. It's kind of hard to watch some movies, unless it's just stupid, right? And funny, and not have some stuff to say about it afterwards. Like usually it's like deep, like if you really think about it, right?
Right. Well, this was awesome. And actually, Yvette's been listening to a podcast. I wish I remember the name of it. But it's two Black hosts, and they touched on, and you and I and Chris kind of touched and talked about Dave Chappelle's Stick and Stones. Yeah. And they take a dive into it a little bit. Not killing Dave Chappelle, but I think of silencing the voice of a comic and what we do. Yvette would know a little further on what it is, but I think they were kind of saying that, some of the things he said were a little too far. And I think he did go far, but I think it was the frustration of the current media and culture of just wanting to shut everything up, where it just at one point just felt so natural if it came from a good place, right? Obviously, right? If things come from a good place and you're having a conversation and you can laugh and talk about it, and laughter is such a healing thing that when you do open it up and leave it to laughter, when you can laugh about it, it changes everything. When you get angry and suppress it is when things hurt, right? You become that Hulk. So there's some really good podcasts out there that touch on that. But, that was one of those films where it was like, he touches on everything from race to sexuality, just being woke. And I think it was definitely an angry film for him, but it's nice to have the platform to be able to talk about it and shed your feelings, and he has that power to do so, and being able to use your influence to get your message across, I think is respectful, no matter what it is that you want to say. And, we're so fortunate to be in a time where we have podcasts, we have webinars, we have this new thing, Clubhouse now, TikTok, all these different social media platforms for people to actually create their own audience, create their consciousness, accept who they are, and actually find those channels to where you find that belonging that you need. But with that said, thank you so much for being on. Where can everybody get your books? Where can your books be found for purchase if someone's interested in purchasing and reading further? Where can we get them?
So the first book can be bought, Crossing Black, can be bought on Amazon or on the publisher website. It's the University of Tennessee Press. And the second book, Mixed Race Superheroes, is also available on Amazon or from that publisher's press. And so that is Rutgers University Press, if you just go to their website. So yeah, wherever fine books are bought and sold. And so they're not, they're not beach reads, but wherever academic books are sold, you'll find these.
All right, just a couple final questions before you go. We kind of touched on this, but if we could do a final answer, how have representations of racial mixedness changed in popular culture, TV, film, media, within the last couple of years?
So I'll say that the way in which mixed race people, and specifically I focus on Black, white, mixed race. I mean, mixed race could be anything, but my focus is Black, white, mixed race. The way they have been kind of portrayed and thought about kind of historically to the present has been very contradictory, right? And I'd argue that there has been, I think I said this before, kind of fascination with mixed race people, and you like romanticization, I'll say a fetishization of them, right? How we fetishize them. And there's also ways in which they have represented our, when I say our, meaning America's, anxieties and fears of, dissolving whiteness or, things like that. And so you can see that in early representations. So there are a lot, like in literature and film, there are a lot of tragic mulattoes. And so that term was coined back in the 40s, but basically the tragic mulatto, mulatto is like a pejorative term. We don't use that term anymore, but it's an archetype of like the psychologically confused, mixed race person, often woman, who doesn't know who she is and has a hard life. And in literature, she would always die in the end or commit suicide. And that was a familiar archetype because I think it very clearly represented not only how white America and Black America were at odds, and thus like the merging of them was not going to, be successful, but also kind of spoke to our own, like I said, our own anxieties and fears. Our own, meaning America, white America. All right, so if we skip to, I think we've made great strides. You mentioned, what is it? Ginny and Georgia, the Netflix.
Georgia and Ginny, yeah.
Right, where the mixed race teen girl is a white mother, right? I might mention, Halsey, I don't know, Drake. All these like celebrities or singers are mixed race. Our current vice president is mixed race, right? Indian parent and a Black Jamaican parent. Oh, there was a CBS show called, I never watched it, but Bob Hart's Abishola was a white American dude who was married to a Black African woman. And so how these representations change, I think some of what we talk about in Mixed Race Superheroes is that things change, but then the more things change and more things stay the same, so that we have more positive. Oh, Mixed-ish. I should have said that. That show.
Oh, that show, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a really great.
It's a spin-off of Blackish, right?
Yeah. So it takes the mother, who's played by Tracy Ellis Ross.
Love her. Yeah.
And it's supposed to be her background because she has a Black mother and a white father. So So I guess I'd say that there are a lot more representations and depictions that make it such that interracial unions are not seen as an aberration. It's not right? So it's more commonplace. There are more positive representations. And then along with that, because this is the scholar and critic in me, I also see how our fetishization and romanticization of mixed race kind of continues, right? And our anxieties and fears kind of continue, right, in these representations. So I would say there have been great strides, more representations, and I'd argue that the deeper that you look, we also hold on to, stereotypical representations. I mean, I talk about that, and we don't have time for it now, but I talk about that in Homecoming in really subtle ways. It's nothing like direct, but in really subtle ways, I also see some continuation of some kind of problematic preconceptions of mixedness. So I guess it's like anything else, right? Which is that we're making strides, right? I mean, if you just even think about this nation, obviously we can't argue we haven't made strides since 1960.
Right, there is no argument there for sure.
There, we also can't argue that this country is deeply divided. And has, and that systematic racism doesn't exist, right? So yes, things have changed, but yes, things still, right? Clearly, we are desperate for continuous things to change. We're at a crossroads. So I'd say the same thing for mixed race representations.
Who's your favorite superhero? And if you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
So my favorite new superhero is she's a badass. Her name is Moon Girl, and she's a Marvel. I don't know if anyone's watching, but I'll at least show you, Eric. That's Moon Girl.
Okay.
She's like a 9-year-old Black girl who lives in Harlem and who is the most intelligent person in the world. Like, she's smarter than Hulk, she's smarter than Bruce Wayne, she's smarter than everybody. So it's a new spinoff. You know what they're doing now, right? Like Marvel is they're taking all these old, right, characters, sometimes revamping him. So the original was Moon Boy, and he was this kind of prehistoric dude who had a Tyrannosaurus Rex as his partner. And so in the, new millennium version, she's a Black girl and she still has the T-Rex. And she's just kind of badass. And of course, representation matters no matter who you are, right? And so, maybe you went to go see Into the Spider-Verse and heard, well, I don't know, but heard, Spanish speaking and thought, yes, finally, right? There's a Latino superhero. And so same thing for me when I saw this Moon Girl. So she's awesome, especially if you have a girl. I'm all about any type of girl power, but it should be for boys too. So that's my favorite right now. And my daughter's read all of them and she loves them, which I loved that she loved.
Was this the one, the character depicted in the show we were talking about, the HBO show, or no? Remember little girl drew her and created it? I thought that's, yeah.
Some illusion. I didn't, Chris was talking about it. I had no idea.
So it was Moon Girl.
Reference to her. Yeah.
They referenced her. Yep.
And I'd say, I think the classic response to like superpower, what would it be? Would be flying, right? I mean, my husband's a pilot, and I'm not. He'd probably say that, but I would say invisibility, which I think is maybe another one people would.
Wow, I think there's a lot behind that one.
There is, but I'd say it's connected to like what do I do? The base of what I do is I kind of I am an examiner of culture and life and literature, right? And I'm really interested in what's behind the scenes. And so I think invisibility would be cool. And not just like the other cool stuff I could do with it, right? But, not to be seen and to hear, right, offers you a kind of insight that you can be the fly on the wall, would offer you insight into issues and things that you would never get otherwise. And that makes sense for me in terms of how I'm always trying to unearth things. So I'm not going to do anything nefarious with it, but I'm going to go for invisibility.
I like it. I think you've got yourself a character. I think you should develop it. I'd love to see a comic book on Invisible Girl with that perception, because my head's just automatically going on what you could do. I think there's a lot to be said for it. Growing up, I don't know. I'm not gonna psychoanalyze you because I don't have it, but like invisibility, I automatically think, all right, I felt invisible sometimes, and being in the moment, like nobody even knew I was there, and all I heard and captured from it, I'm like, do you guys even know that I'm here and what you're saying and what's being said? Like, so much can be said for that, a whole series. So that would be interesting. Which goes into my next question. What are you working on now? What is the current research? And are we going to see an invisible girl maybe?
I want Cortez to draw her. You're
good luck.
Amazing artistic talent. I probably have to
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, we went to his art show last night. He had a lot of amazing work that he did for school.
Yeah, he's probably beyond my pay grade. I don't know if I can. So I am writing I found this series called Goldie Vance. So I'm going to just show a little picture. That's Goldie right in the middle. So it's a graphic novel that takes place in Florida. There's a couple volumes of it. And she's kind of like a Nancy Drewish detective, whatever. And she works in a hotel. And it takes place in the 1960s. And she solves all these crimes. And it's like light and fun. But what's interesting about it is she's, her dad's Black and her mom's white. Her dad works in the hotel. And so that's why I started reading. I'm like, okay, let me see what's going on in here. And to me, what the most fascinating part of it is, and what I'm writing about, is that the series takes place in the 60s in Florida. And yet it purposely is not historically accurate. In other words, there's no race issues. She's like this badass woman who does all this stuff. There's no like sexism issues. So it's like this purposeful kind of like ahistoric thing. And a little South Florida legal history is what I'll end with here. Is what was interesting to me about it is I was like, well, first of all, I was like, it's really weird to read something that's supposed to take place during a time period, but the main thing that would be going on is not going on, right? Right? So that's bizarre, right? It's like reading something that, take place in the 1800s where women are like in positions of power. Like that's
right.
And so that's what the series is doing purposely, right? So I was looking into, and this is something I didn't know before, I was looking into South Florida history. And most of us know about the Supreme Court ruling Loving versus Virginia, right? Mm-hmm. So that was the ruling that said that that basically legalized interracial marriage, right? Before 1967, and not all, but in many, particularly southern states, it was illegal for Black people and white people to marry, right? After 1967, the Supreme Court ruled that was unconstitutional. So in 1964, so 3 years before that, there was this court case, McLaughlin versus Florida. And there was a hotel worker. So this is the connection, because a Black hotel worker and a white woman, his girlfriend, who was a waitress. He was from Honduras, but really dark skinned. And so they read him as Negro, right? And they were living together, not married, living together. And there were laws on the books in Florida that said that any Negro man that lived with a white woman, or any Black Negro woman who lived with a white man, could not cohabitate, right? If they did, you'd have to, right, pay fees or whatever was illegal. So they lived together. So they were breaking the law. Somebody ratted on them, right? And in the ruling, they deemed that these called miscegenation. That's a word they used for, race mixing. They deemed anti-miscegenation laws about cohabitation unconstitutional. So this was not about marriage, just about cohabitation. Right. But in other words, 3 years before Loving versus Virginia, there was this in Florida case that said that, no, Florida, you can't say that these people can't live together. All of that to say, I was like, oh, that's interesting. In this series I'm reading, Goldie Vance, her dad, who's Black, works for a hotel, and her mom, who's white, is a waitress, just like the plaintiffs in this, right, in the court case. So long story short, it's what I've been using my sabbatical for. I've been researching about South Florida history, and I want to talk about the ways in which these series attempts to stray away from the past, right? Like pretend, it's historic, but how we can never do that, right? And that subtly and probably indirectly, it's always recalling the past. And one way I'm going to talk about that is through her parentage and its connection to McLaughlin versus Florida, 1964.
Who wrote that series?
So it is.
Are they mixed? Are they white or black, or do we know?
White. No, I do know. Yeah, I've looked them up. She's white. Hope Larson is the primary writer. And I was doing research, I was reading some interviews with her where she said, they asked her about this. They were like, this interesting takes place in, and I should say that aesthetically, it's gorgeous and very retro. Like here's like a little, look at her, her glasses.
Yeah, I love it.
Look at this guy, looks like he's out of Greece, or so everything is retro. The clothing is retro, everything, right? But then the situation, right? And there's no way a black man would have been, there's all these things that are not possible, especially in the 60s, right? Where I was looking at more South Florida history. So for example, in these books, everyone who comes and stays at the hotel and all her friends are all multiracial. I mean, there'll be an Asian and a black, and it's like the United, remember Benetton? I mean, that's
yeah.
We're dating ourselves. It reminds me of those Benetton. Oh, everyone gets along, right? Which would not have been the case. And I was looking up, I was like, I'm not from Florida and I just don't know this. It makes so much sense. But Florida used to have, in other places, they used to have sit-ins, right? We know about that, where black people, sometimes with, white allies would go and sit at a diner, right? Where people would pour sugar and whatever, right? Where they were not supposed to be because of segregation. Well, in Florida, they had wait-ins where beaches were segregated, right? Which is so ridiculous because like the ocean water, you can't separate, eventually the water that touched a white foot is going to touch your foot, whatever. So they had these wait-ins in which blacks and whites to protest segregation, right? Where blacks would either go to the white beach or blacks and whites would go to a beach together, right? To kind of protest these things. And so I'm going to talk about that too. I'm learning about all this kind of South Florida history. I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. And that's really interesting that was the Florida equivalent. And it connects to the series because it takes place in this fancy resort where everyone goes to the beach. And it's mixed. Everyone goes to the beach.
Right.
Like in 1962, there would have been, it was segregated and there would have been issues. But of course, it doesn't talk about, these books don't talk about the wait-ins or don't talk about, and purposely don't. And so in an interview, Hope Larson, the writer, when she was asked about it, she said that she didn't mean anything by it, that she liked the 60s aesthetically, right? Like she liked the architecture, she liked the style of dress and such. And that's why she chose it, but that she intended to be kind of like Riverdale in Archie comics. I don't know if you know this, right? And I took that line that she says, like it meant to be like Riverdale, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting because Riverdale has a set of issues, right? No. For the first black character didn't come until like the end when it's no longer popular, and they purposely avoided race and all these things. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that you used that. See, this is what we do, right? I'm like, oh, it's interesting that you would use that reference out of all, because you're doing the same thing, right? Which is you are, in a way, just, it doesn't exist. And no, I'm not doing it for any purpose. But, from a critic's point of view or critic's eye, I see everything as historically and otherwise kind of connected, right? So it's exciting. It's exciting to read a little bit about Florida, South Florida history, and to try to make some connections. And plus, I just really like them. They're like detective, cute little detective things. I think they're probably more YA, like young adult, meant for like teens or whatever. But I really enjoy them, and they're really cool and cute. So that's what I'm working on.
Well, great. I can't wait to hear more about it and hopefully read it. This was awesome, as usual. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely.
I can't wait to publish it and send it out to everyone. So thank you all. Thank you all for welcoming Dr. Sika Dagbovie-Mullins. Super interesting books. Make sure you grab them on Amazon. Reach out if you have any questions or want to learn more or have on your show. Thank you again. Have a great day.